welcome to today's little podcast. I am here today with one of our senators, District 17, is
That's
that
right.
correct? Mr. Shane Jett. And why don't you introduce yourself? I don't think you've been on here with us. Introduce yourself a
Sure.
little bit.
So I'm Shane Jett. I'm the state senator from Senate District 17, which covers most of Pottawatomie County, the lower southeastern corner of Oklahoma County, which is Henryetta, and then the upper northeastern tip of Cleveland County, just outside of the McLeod School District area. So Shawnee is my hometown.
Right.
I went to Oklahoma Baptist University in Shawnee and graduated from there. Lived in Brazil for a couple of years where I met my wife, served 11 years in the United States Navy as an intelligence officer. At the age of 28, I was elected to the House of Representatives, served for 6 years with the first Republican majority in 80 years of Oklahoma history.
Wow.
Was out for 10 years, served 3.5 years with the first Trump administration at U.S. Treasury. I left the Navy in 2020, threw my hat in the ring for the Senate District 17 there in Shawnee, and took out an 8-year incumbent. That was fun. And served for 4 years and just got reelected. 3 opponents, 4-way primary, and God bless us, and we won without a runoff. So I'm here in my last term as a state senator, one of the top 3 most senior.
So that was just last November, right?
That was in November, yes, sir.
So 3 more years and that's it.
Yeah, 2 more years now to go. So
Yeah.
and then I'll have served the full 12 years in the state legislature, and
Right.
hopefully
Yeah,
leave it a little
you-
safer than we found
you
it.
said 2004?
2004, but I was out for a decade.
Oh, okay.
And that's when I was in the United States Navy, in the private sector in banking and finance, and that's when Donald Trump appointed me to U.S. Treasury.
Right, yeah. I tried to figure out a little bit who you were because
Sure.
I didn't know anything. We actually met today at the GOP, what do you call it? I call it town hall, basically.
Candidate forum.
Or a candidate forum. And we decided to come down here and sit down in the studio for a little bit. So that's interesting. We had a little bit of private discussion, and you were talking a little bit about, what do you call it?
Oklahoma Freedom Caucus.
The Freedom Caucus. So why don't we, because that's something that interests me, and I haven't studied what you guys have done over the last year. I guess this was formed when?
September of 2024, we
Okay, so
founded
it's
the
not
Freedom
even a year
Caucus.
yet.
That's right. But it existed on the national level.
Right.
The core conservative group in the United States House of Representatives,
Right.
Representative Josh Burkeen, a former state senator from this area, was part of founding the Freedom Caucus, and it has created the State Freedom Caucus Network, which is a nationwide organization establishing freedom caucuses in each of the state legislatures. So I believe there's 13 now freedom caucuses throughout the United States. We were the 12th, I believe, and we formally launched with a press conference in front of the state capitol on September of 2024 and launched the Oklahoma Freedom Caucus.
Right. Yeah. Tell me, because I'm acting as a voter today.
Sure.
And to educate myself a little bit about what is the Freedom Caucus all about, just give me a little bit of details, why it was formed. There is a longer history about it, I guess, on a national level, but can you fill me in there a little bit?
Sure. So the Freedom Caucus is basically laser focused on representing taxpayers to hold accountable state government to make sure that we are being good stewards and conservative stewards of the taxpayer dollars, making sure that we're representing the values of the taxpayers, that we're not growing government at their expense. And that's one focus, is the economic impact of the growth, the continuing growth of both federal and state government, but then also making sure we're maximizing their individual freedom at home. So if they're feeling government imposing themselves and taxing their property, taxing their income, taxing the food that they purchase, all of the stuff that they're collecting taxes from the taxpayer, but often the taxpayer's interests are not really represented as we're forming policies or establishing laws that erode their freedoms instead of expand their freedoms. So Freedom Caucus is very simple. It's basically the core Republican values actually holding accountable the legislature to uphold and legislate like they campaign.
That is something I absolutely would love to see.
Most Oklahomans would love to see that.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at the 2024 election cycle, there were senators who lost their election who would campaign as conservatives, but then would legislate as not conservatives. And so that we saw the grassroots response to that, even if they were really highly ranked leadership, Senate leaders. Right. The people back home didn't care what their title was. They cared that they campaigned one way and legislated another, and they sent a freshman in to replace them. So what we're seeing is that Oklahoma grassroots, your mom and pops, suddenly are waking up and realizing just because we are the reddest state in the union and a supermajority doesn't mean that the Republicans we elect actually legislate or lead like they campaign to us. So we have an engaged population that is saying, we want to see that what you told us on the doorstep when you're knocking doors is reflecting in the values that you're actually implementing.
Isn't there another word for that?
It's called hypocrisy.
Yeah. Swamp,
deep state.
Swamp
and at the end of the day, it's human nature, right? So no lobbyist has ever come into my office representing the petroleum industry or a teachers union or hospital association ever asked me for less of your money. They always want more.
Right.
And all of the state agencies, they have state taxpayer funded lobbyists called legislative liaisons. And your tax dollars are being paid for their salary, and their job is to come ask me for more of your money. That's their job.
Yeah.
And not a state agency has ever said, we want to have fewer employees, smaller footprint, more streamlined mission, or efficiencies, and certainly not less dollars.
Right.
And so if we do not artificially impose on state government a restriction in their ability to grow, they will always insist on and try to justify getting more, not less, of your tax dollars. So that's our job as Freedom Caucus.
Yeah, and and to me, I tell you a little bit of my story. I'm born in a different country. Moved here in 1987. Got me a condo in Florida and ended up there and stayed there for most of my life. And this is 1987, so quite a few years ago. And one of the reasons I kind of swapped from Sweden to come to the United States, I had business interests here, but it was also the freedom. It was also, at that time, you could see that there was a vast difference between, and at that time we had the Social Democrats ruling the country. Our taxes were 50, 60, 70%. You know, you make 100,000 and they take 60,000 away from you. A lot of that happened. And when you look at history of the United States, the taxation history is really only just over 100 years.
That's right.
It came a lot of times with promises of it's going to be short term and then we're going to lift it. The interesting part for me, and that's why we have like the interesting part here with Trump coming in, and he's talking about trade and taxation. And that's really how our government was funded in,
that's right.
in the 1800s, right?
That's right. In 1913, whenever they passed the income tax, 1911 through 1913 was that period of time. It was basically taxing, for the first time that we began taxing the income of American citizens.
Yeah.
And it was a disaster. They also created the Federal Reserve, which basically can constrict or increase our money supply, which creates the inflation. And if you look at through all the economic crises that the United States has had since the foundation of the Federal Reserve, they've exacerbated it, not made it better. And it's not accountable to the American people. It is accountable to its own board, and they have allegiances around the world that did not necessarily align with American values.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I think the grassroots needs to look at.
Mm-hmm.
There's money going overseas. That is, I don't understand it.
Right. Well, even President Trump and Elon Musk and others are calling for an audit of the United States Treasury, wanting them to give account for the money that they had that was sent overseas, and they'd rather resign than to disclose that. So there's a wake-up call, I think, across the United States, where people are waking up both politically and spiritually. They're realizing there is palpable evil of people that are doing the wrong thing for the wrong reason because they're aligned with the wrong side. And it's not in the interest of the American people. So you have a spiritual awakening, but you also have a political awakening where people are just saying, you know what, you're charging me too much. Margaret Thatcher said it very well. The problem with socialism is eventually you run out of everybody else's money.
Yeah. Reagan had kind of similar ideas. He did a lot for taxes too, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, he couldn't do as much as he wanted because a lot of the time he was in the White House, the Democrats were in control of either the House or the Senate. But Reagan said, quote I was listening to last night, he said, the closest thing we see to eternal life is a government program. Government program doesn't shrink unless we force them to do so.
Right.
That's why we have DOGE, right?
Right.
The Department of Efficiency.
It's going to be interesting to follow that and see how it goes. But it wouldn't surprise me if there is $1 trillion or more in waste.
Oh, I'm sure there is. At least $1 trillion in waste.
Yeah.
We had an economic downturn when I was a House member in 2008 when the too big to fail, all the markets were collapsing with the real estate and mortgage collapse. We, the newly formed Republican majority in the House, and the Senate was still, as I recall, was still in control of the Democratic Party. Republicans asked all the state agencies to bring us their best ideas to cut and streamline because we were going to have a downturn in the tax revenue that was coming in. And what we discovered is that they actually came up with more cuts than was required, than we asked for. And there was almost a panic as a result whenever it became discovered that there was all kinds of ways for them to save money whenever they actually pivoted and began looking at that as a problem set. Right. As soon as they realized they had come up with more cuts than required, they went on a spending spree. They bought flat screen TVs, they bought leather furniture, and they spent all the money they would have saved up to the point of the minimum that we had required of them. So I know there's waste and there's waste, fraud, and abuse, but sometimes it's simply government will continue to grow until you artificially require them to retrench. We do it in the private sector. My dad was a muffler shop owner, small business owner. Right. And if muffler jobs didn't come in, well, we retrenched on the size of a vacation we're going to take that coming summer.
Oh, yeah.
And so that happens naturally. If you get laid off, then you've got to figure out, okay, well, we're going to buy a few less groceries, or, we tighten our belts. That's natural in the private sector. It's not natural in the public sector, and that's the reason why we, the representative taxpayers, force them to do that.
Why do you think that is? I mean, that's really common sense, right? If your income level is here and your expense level is here, and then suddenly over time it grows the expense levels in more, where can you make the most money? That's cutting, right?
That's right.
Why do you think that is? That
on the state side?
On the state side and maybe the federal side.
So the thing is, your salary in the state government is often calculated based on your spread of management, how many people answer to you. So you want more of that, not less of that. The size of your total dollar amount of your budget can be a part of the metrics of calculating what your salary is going to be. So all the things that is calibrated to benefit a head of an agency is designed on growth, not reduction in size. Right. And so the only group that is not being represented is the group that's paying for it, and that's the taxpayers, if we don't require them to come up with ways to be more efficient with the tax dollars.
Right, because I don't see that the government in any way, like a private company does, generates profits.
No, it does not.
With their money.
We are an expense. Government is an expense. We do not create wealth. We extract it from the people who turn their labor into value.
Right.
And that value then is extracted in the percentages, in your home value, and in your work value, in your transactions in the stores. All those types of things get pulled into state coffers and then get spent. And this is going to blow your mind. Some legislators love spending your money, and they don't want to spend less of it. They want to spend more of it. And that's the reason why we saw last year we had a grocery tax and not an income tax, which would really help the working people in Oklahoma. Even the Democrats were supportive of the grocery tax. So that will tell you that there is a philosophical difference.
How did that grocery tax work?
Well, it's a moratorium. So basically they removed the state grocery tax portion, but left the local portion intact. Right. But it's only for a short period of time, and it's going to go back.
Right.
And so what we expect, probably, the moratorium was that you can't raise the local tax to offset the savings and the state tax. So effectively, they're going to get a reprieve for a short period of time and then go right back to spending those tax dollars. But if you really want to if you want something to grow, you subsidize it. Right. If you want something to shrink, you penalize it by taxing it. And so if you want people to work more, create more value, then you let them keep and reward themselves with their labor. And so reducing taxes encourages productivity, not reducing it. But when we start extracting that from mom and pop businesses all over Oklahoma because we believe we can spend it better than they can, then we're on a pathway that is economic ruin.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's there's a lot of questions and answers that people like me. I'm not a journalist. I'm just a regular person here, and I look at you guys in there, and we try to hold you accountable. I think it's just have been so much of hiding the way they're voting that we, as the general public, I'm talking at myself as part of the general public, we don't know exactly what they stand for unless you start digging in, and I think you can get a lot of documentation and stuff if you're interested to dig into it yourself. But how many does that? So I think here the media has to be accountable too, to actually get some of this information out. I don't know where you stand on that.
Oh, absolutely. I believe in transparency and accountability. Transparent means you know what I'm doing. Accountability is you can come and yell at me if you don't like it. Right. But none of that works without access. If you can't reach out and get in touch with me, you can't hold me accountable, even if you know what I'm doing.
That's right.
So in my Senate district, I have 90,000 constituents. Every single mail out that I send out has my personal mobile on that I've had for 20 years.
Right.
And I get text messages and phone calls sometimes at 2 a.m. My constituents know they can reach out to me, but that's not always the case.
Right.
And so what I urge people is hold accountable your House and Senate members. First, find out who they are, and you can look them up. You can put your home address on a website that the state government has.
Right.
Put it in, and it'll tell you who your House member is, your Senate member. It'll even tell you how to get in touch with them.
Right.
It'll give the governor, your congressional delegation member, and both of your U.S. senators. All you got to do is put your website. It's easy.
Well, we're going to put that in a link in this interview.
It's oklegislature.gov. Put that up, because that right there, you can look up any piece of legislature on the left-hand column.
Right.
Or any state legislator based on an address. It could be your home address, your church address, your business address, because you may have 3 different representatives that represent different parts of your life. You can only vote for one, but you can influence the others if you call them up and say, hey, I live in Representative so-and-so's district, but I work in your district and most of my employees are from your district. And we were talking and I told them I'd give you a call. Well, that connects the dots with that legislator, that they know this conversation is directly connected to potential voters. Yeah. And so if you know how to, what I tell people, take an inventory of your sphere of influence. Right. Where do you worship? Where do you work? Where do you live? Where does your family live? And you can look up each of those legislators, contact them and say, I'm calling you, I'm not in your district, but my children live in your district, my friend lives in your district, and I'm calling on his or her behalf. Right. That, we're always looking to connect. Right. And if we know that that connection is directly tied to a conversation that's going to influence a vote, that usually says this is a part of the job that is important to me because it's tied to people I represent.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so another thing that I have few questions about
Sure.
is lobbying, if we can go there for a minute.
Sure.
In most of other countries, we call it corruption, but isn't that so a little bit?
So it depends on how it works, right? So you have lobbyists that represent grassroots, right? That are they're coming up to the Capitol to say, I agree with this because it helps me. I disagree with this because it hurts me. And any American citizen, any Oklahoma citizen can come up to the Capitol and do that. And they're lobbying for their family, right? And so really what's important is their integrity in that relationship, is their honesty in that relationship, is their transparency.
Yeah.
Who's trying to influence you, right? And that's the reason why we have
on
the
that
Ethics
aspect,
Commission.
On that aspect, if I do that as a grassroots, there's no money involved.
Correct.
I don't benefit from it. The government might benefit from it if the pressure from the grassroots becomes big enough.
Correct.
The corruption I'm talking about is more like the corporate influence that we have, and maybe I don't know how much in the state Senate, but for sure, if you take one example, COVID, the pharmaceutical industry, probably the largest lobbyist in our federal government.
Absolutely,
one of them.
That's
sure.
right. That's right.
How do we end that part?
So, I mean, that's a complex question that even the Supreme Court grappled with in their Citizens United court case, where they're saying people have the right for freedom of speech. The problem with freedom is it's messy.
Yeah.
And the single most efficient form of government is a dictatorship, but we don't like that. And so, unfortunately, in order to enjoy all the freedoms, we have to also enjoy the freedoms of people who do things we don't like, right? What we try to do is make sure there's transparency whenever those doing those things. But I would love to have the members of Congress to wear patches, just like whenever you're in NASCAR and you have all the patches of your different sponsors. It'd be great. You come in, okay, you're representing Pfizer and Moderna today, because we need that transparency. We try to achieve that transparency by requiring with the Federal Election Commission, FEC, or the Oklahoma Ethics Commission, where they have to disclose anyone who writes a check to their campaign. We can go in and Google that or look it up on Guardian at the Oklahoma Ethics Commission and see who's giving to whom. Often it's your grandmother and your friend and people from church, but sometimes it's from industries. And then what you look for is okay, you got a lot of contributions from the pharmaceutical industrial complex, and now you're running mandates trying to force people to take a vaccine. Then now we know what you're doing. You're transparent. Now accountability comes. We're not going to vote for you.
All right. How do we tackle that problem?
Well, by an engaged. First of all, we have to know what's going on.
Yeah.
So here in Oklahoma, we were in control of the Democratic Party for 100 years until I came into the House of Representatives in 2004, and we had just for 2 years, in 1921 to 1923, the Republicans controlled the House of Representatives. It was a fluke, and then the following election cycle was over, and not until 2004 did the Republicans take control of the House. But not until 2008 did they take control of the Senate for the very first time in state history. So there's been a shift of Democrat control to Republican control. So there's still a lot of cleanup that is happening as a result of Democrat controlled in the House for a long period of time.
Is that shift due to people coming in from other places, or is it a conscious change in people's minds and how they are? What do you think? What do you contribute that to?
There's a number of confluent factors that have created this shift. One of them is that Oklahomans tend to be a conservative people. It's like I said on the Senate floor debate when we were talking about transgender surgeries, I said, you don't have to explain to an FFA kid from Macomb, Oklahoma, that a billy goat and a billy goat can't make a baby goat. So there's some just baseline common sense that happens in rural America that is maybe lost in some of the more urban areas where they kind of lose touch with reality. So part of it is we're at our core, we're conservative people. There's also a tremendous number of churches, Baptist churches and Catholic churches and Pentecostal churches, where they're preaching we've got to, as a body of believers, hold accountable elected officials who do not reflect our values. So I think the raised consciousness of Christians engaging in and holding accountable those elected officials who do not share their values also is contributing to that.
Right.
So there's a shift. But also, when I came into the House of Representatives as a Republican in 2004, well, prior to that, in living history for us,
Right.
there hadn't been any Republicans. I was the first Republican elected to that Pottawatomie County district.
Right.
And so if you were a Republican back then, you were a real Republican.
Right.
Because if you just wanted power, you were a registered Democrat.
Right.
And so as we shifted and the Republicans began to gain control, you had Democrats or individuals who really had no ideological mooring to the left or right. They just wanted to be at the table of power to cut deals. And they registered Republican to get elected. And now they're up at the Capitol cutting deals. And if a lobbyist knows that you're willing to cut a deal, then they've got a deal for you. And so part of it is the transparency. Your voters have to know what you're doing. And in order to do that, they have to have access to the information
Right.
about what you're doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at all this, and especially then looking back in history, 4 years there with COVID and all that, there was a lot of things going on. Obviously, I wasn't here in the country. Interestingly, Philippines was probably even more strict. We got locked up in our house for 2 years. 2 years.
Insane.
And I just did a little research a few months back, and I interviewed a lot of people just because I'm interested. Just ask, how many do you know that died from COVID? You know what? I probably asked 100 people. Not a single one. So,
what a lot of them here in the United States died from was protocols that were lethal. The treatment protocols killed as many, if not more, people than COVID did. And the research will bear that out.
yeah.
So the ventilation, if you got on ventilation, your probability of dying went up exponentially. If you got on remdesivir they knew would destroy your kidneys, and they were dying of failed kidneys and not from COVID, because there was a narrative they were pushing. The protocols showed that.
You know remdesivir, where it came from and why it was developed.
Was it? I think it was sort of the virus AIDS. Is that correct?
No, Ebola.
Ebola. That's correct. Yes, it was Ebola.
And they had just for the interesting part, 2 years in a house not being able to go out. They gave me a lot of times to do a lot of study, and I studied this. I dug into data from Europe, from Germany, from England, from France, everywhere possible. And I saw, before they even talked about it, I said, this is a scam.
Yes, absolutely.
And
you create a crisis that you make money on the crises, and then you make money on the solution at the end of the crises, and that was intentional.
Right, absolutely. And anyway, the Ebola was developed for, or the remdesivir was developed for Ebola, and they had a trial going on with it. If you find that trial, it's a very interesting trial to read. It was like 700 people in that trial. 54% died within 14 days.
Of liver failure or kidney failure.
Kidney failure.
That's correct.
And water in their lungs.
That's right. That's right. They knew that. And the people that were pushing that knew that, but there were financial benefits to following that protocol. And there was also legislative or policy protection. If you followed the protocol, then you would not be prosecuted for malpractice. And so because of cowardice and avarice, people died that should not have.
Yeah, I believe so. Well, it's good that some of you actually dared to talk about it today, because it was 2-3 years ago.
Well, you get shut down on social media real quick. Why? Because the same people that were selling it.
I had a YouTube channel with thousands of followers. And I mentioned it.
That's right. And why is that? Because the same people that were making money on all those protocols also owned the lion's share of the companies that had the platforms for the media or social media.
Yeah.
That is the reason they were going.
And I'm the one that wondering, the pardon that took place just 4, 5, 6 days before he left office. Dr. Fauci was one of them.
Well,
and I'm wondering, no, this is a grassroots question.
sure.
Why do you have to pardon somebody that you have claimed for years that he didn't do anything wrong?
Yeah, because he did something wrong, and we know that. We know that in our gut, and we know it from the facts. But Fauci has been engineering death since the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
And that's all been documented. And the mass media and the deep state try to shut it down. And here's part of the problem. People have bought into climate change where human beings are the problem. And the only way we save the planet, air quotes, save the planet, is by reducing the population. So there is people who sincerely believe that death is of humans is the solution to saving the planet. They believe human beings is an existential threat to the planet. Therefore, any policies that reduces the number of people on the planet is wholesome in the long run. And so I have said that anyone who expresses support of a reduction in population as a climate change ideological posture, if they cause the death of anyone, then that is prima facie indication they had motive to kill those people.
Yeah. Well, you look at it, and you look at some of these people. I can't stand or understand WEF and their policies and all that. So it's part of an agenda that.
Yes,
that you're talking about.
There's only two sides.
Depopulate.
There's two sides. Those that are on the side of kill, steal, and destroy, and bondage, and those that embrace freedom in all of its messiness.
Right.
And so elitists like to control us. They like to make us sick so they can make money off of our treatment. And they want to reduce our population, and since population has to be reduced, they want to be the ones who decides who is eliminated.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, they're mass murderers, they are tyrants, and the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution is the backdrop to the First Amendment, which guarantees all the freedoms that they tried to take away from us during COVID.
Right.
The Second Amendment guarantees that tyrants meet a timely and appropriate end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we end on that note?
Sure.
Hey, it was nice having you here.
Likewise. I'm so glad you chose Oklahoma as your final destination.
Well, I don't know if it's going to be my final, but
well, here's hoping.
I'll be here for a while. Let's put it that way.
Very good. Well, we put home right in the middle of our state name, so you would know that you were welcome when you got here.
Right.
Oklahoma.
I'm home.